Around the campfire, a group of treasure hunters sit around the campfire after a long day at camp, sharing stories with each other, stories that explain, explore, explicate on why they do this dangerous, often thankless work. Whoever would like to tell the tale first, please do.
Yeah, everybody's so scared.
You all showed
Uh,
up to the call.
yeah,
Presumably, that means you're ready to share a story.
I will start. I think I think it is sort of just this sort of quiet night. I think that there's because based on the size of the camp and the same size of the company, there's like several little campfires around, and I think we've collected around this particular one. I think Abeja is rather striking of the crew because they, unlike the rest of them, presumably wear a wooden mask on their face. It is a little bit of an odd thing, featureless except for the eye holes. And I think every so often, they when they're eating, they just lift it up ever so slightly to feed themselves. And I think like there is a little bit of an awkward silence for a while. Hmm. Nights like this remind me about how I came to this group. My general, like most of you, presumably all of you, are in it for money. But as to what end, well, I aim to find the resting ground of the morning nights. Probably unfamiliar to most, but it is a legend in which, in a land far away, there lies a knight who was a friend to the Fae, who defended them, who cared for them, who loved them, who was buried in their land. But being a mortal man, being of two worlds effectively, it's said that to anyone who can find this grave, this resting site, can transform themselves into another type of being, from human to fae to human. And I just find it really fascinating that for a human man, you would want to become one of them. Humanity is a very strange thing. It gives you joy, gives you a sense of belonging. Sitting next to me, that's the question.
I'll go next if no one else will. I think panning over from Obeha is a figure who is actually not often seen speaking amongst these fireside gatherings, for he is usually found in his tent at most hours as one of the company's most dedicated surgeons, a place of antiseptic smell mixed with copper and blood. Typically, in that tent, there are the cots and the implements of his trade, and a small wooden stool atop which sits a young boy who mostly just sits there. But tonight, Yargash has joined you all by the fire. He is a sallow skinned, sort of stooped man, pale, sunken eyes, a haunted look to him, but hands that are very clearly capable, slender but strong. And he just sips from a small cup as he muses, "My father was a foolish man. While I was away pursuing the trade, he had made some rather unfortunate investments. Investments that, upon his death as his only son, I inherited. I'm not sure who among you has had the privilege of visiting the Rose District of Amberette before, but there is a woman whose name is known to all the residents of that neighborhood and beyond. They call her Assyrio, Bright Teeth Assyrio, though if you ask, you'll receive a number of reasons and stories for her moniker. I had found myself out of the job, let us say, and seeking a new path forward to apply my craft in more palatable circumstances. A letter I received informed me of my father's demise 3 weeks prior. I did not know the man was even sick. Frankly, I'm not entirely certain he ever really was. But all the same, he died, and I inherited the debt. Assyria works mysteriously. I do not doubt some of you have wondered whether you visited my tent before, as to the nature of the child that travels in my company. I have heard the whispers, I've seen the looks. He is not my son, nor any relative of mine, as I understand it. His name is Lucky. He was bound to me by Syrio, a marker of my father's debt. In addition to the coin with which I owe her, I am to see that child returned unharmed. It is a curious thing, for Lucky only eats meat, but is otherwise silent. I do my best to keep him fed and cared for. But if I do not pay this debt back, many other debtors that came before me with similar tales have all ended in a very unpleasant fate. I am remembering a word of warning my father once imparted to me many years ago, before he even made the foolish overtures to take a debt from Assyrio. He warned me, always look closely at a smile to ensure their teeth don't gleam like daggers. I'm not sure I ever understood the meaning of that until now.
Rias, from across the fire, will take a little sip from whatever he's drinking out of. Next to him, there's a little hourglass with 10-minute markers. And every so often, he's been checking it this while and gazing up to the stars overhead, making little notes in a notebook and looking back to it. At the end of at Yargash's tale, kind of smiles a little to himself. He's Naganese, has this dusky skin, white linen head wrap, and a white tiger pelt that he wears usually around his waist. He says, "It's interesting how many of us have connection to our parents. It feels like we're just continuing a story that began before we were born. As for me, When I was 8 years old, I was afflicted by a terrible disease. I had a fever for weeks. Doctors, they feared for my life. We were miles away from civilization, deep in the jungles of the south, part of a royal expedition out of Nagane. The doctor's medicines, they could not fix me. It was barely enough to keep me alive. But my mother, who was at the time a teacher at the Naganese Royal College of Astrology, she knew of one place you can find any knowledge that you seek. It's the Azure Archives. Now, such a cure existed. You could find it there. Now, some of you may not believe that the Azure Archives are even real. I promise you, they are. Wow. Anyone who knows about the archives understands that to find an entrance to it, one must not just have a place, but also a time. As an astrologer, my mother, she knew of every auspicious date in the calendar. And it just so happened that there was to be a doorway opening soon, not far from our camp. She set out with a few other brave souls, hoping to find a cure for me. I don't know what bargains or promises she made to them, but together, this handful of people, they set out. The last thing I remember is seeing her face silhouetted, a kiss on my forehead that felt like ice, smell of eucalyptus, a buzzing of jungle flies. And then I slept. I drifted in and out of that daze until time lost all meaning to me. And then one night there was a commotion. Someone was in my tent, not my mother, though they smelled familiar. Voices, angry and desperate, but the words, they're the blur to me now. I remember a knife's edge flashing against the torchlight. And then the curing began. Even the most potent numbing herbs could not hide the pain from me. They cut me again and again and again. But when it was done, the fever broke, and I tasted water, actually tasted it for the first time in a long time. It took another week to simply remember how to walk. My muscles, they'd grown feeble, and I'd lost all my weight. But when I finally had the strength to ask where my mother was, I got no answer. The doctors, they turned their heads and pretended I'd said nothing at all. I was in no place to make demands, but as time went on, I grew stronger. I went from water to soups to strips of bread and meat and fruit, and I asked again, where is my mother? Around that time, the moon was crescent in the House of Truths. The Truths are, in Naganese astrology, a family of constellations. And when the moon is in this phase, it's called the open door. And one of those nights, in my dreams, I heard my mother's voice calling to me. She sounded lost, and in this dream, I could not find her. I chased her down dark and twisting corridors, endless. More weeks passed, and I gained more strength. I asked the doctors again what happened to my mother, and when I could not be denied any longer, the one closest to me, he said, one of the people who went with her into the archives returned. The cure my mother sought, though he had been changed. He left the doctors with a book on how to cure my malady, but he took all of my mother's notes on the Azure Archives and destroyed them right then and there. No one dared to stop him, the doctor said, but because of fear or something else, he would not say. He simply left. No one saw him again. I would dream of my mother's voice, calling, searching, the way one calls when they're lost in the wilderness. I spent another year just going from teacher to library in Nagane, searching every scrap of knowledge about the archives. And then, one fateful day, I happened upon a book from someone who claimed to have been there. Read like an explorer's journal with sketches and diagrams and maps, but they were confusing and impossible, even by the writer's own admission. But the writer insists that people, they can get trapped in the archives, not dying, but lost. He claimed that in the archives, he came across Triyavati Is Alang, a Naganese prince who vanished over 4 centuries ago. I'll spare you the details. But I believe that if I can find an entrance to the Azure archives, and if I can inscribe my mother's name in a certain place, I can guide her back. There are ways, the things that people seek in the Azure archives, sometimes they are also sought. And even if she's dead, then perhaps I can guide her back and give her peace. But where she is now, there can be none. And every silver that does not go towards keeping me alive, I'm sending out there to scholars, librarians, astrologers, theologists, even, looking for every scrap on the archives I can find, every possible door, every encounter, every time mark, location, even just rumors of its existence. When, where, whom, by what means. Eventually, of course, I ran out of space in Nagane. There's no more libraries for me there. But a friend told me to come north. Only the kings here do not want to hear omens about the stars unless it's about their next conquest. So I came looking for other work, dangerous work, this kind of work.
After a moment of letting the air breathe a little bit after that story, Bertram stands up and he stumbles over the log that he was sitting on. Clearly, he's been drinking more than some of the other men have. And he stands up, stretches, looks around, he kind of laughs. Ah, you all think I'm mad. I see the way you look at me. Burps. How you turn your noses up at me ranting about this debauched painter. I hear you scoff. I didn't believe about it at first either. Did you know that with every brushstroke of his came from blood? That he used the marrow of lovers and liars for his pigments? It sounds like myth, yes. But then if you see one of his paintings, you see those eyes. The first time I saw one, the painting had no title. It just had a figure with crimson drapes over a body. And her face had so much pain in it. And her eyes, they were so real. They were so alive. You would move from left to right and the eyes would follow you. And that's when I realized I feel like I knew this person. Like she had once been my whole life, but now she's gone. He wasn't just painting people, I don't think. He was trapping them. He painted to bind. He rendered was someone he had consumed. This is not art, I tell you. These are curses. So I've made my plan. At night, I returned to the painting with fire and salt and a blade etched in silver, and I thrashed it. I burned it. I destroyed it. I don't care what watches from within those paintings' eyes. I will not horror any longer. The world still calls him a genius. He spits on the ground. Puh. They can hang his work in salons, worship his vision, but they don't see the truth. Every admirer becomes a stroke of his final masterpiece, but I will not be a part of it. I will destroy every piece of his work, this debauched painter. And he spits on the ground again and tumbles back over one of the logs and passes out.
I think Vendra pays close attention. And if it's okay, Rias, you were drinking some apple cider because Vendra has the orchid ritual, so she can conjure a few dozen apples, some of them poisonous, obviously. So she never seems to run out of apples. And She brought a big jug of cider that goes around, and everyone who wants to gets to take a break, to take a sip. And she's a young woman in her 20s, wrapped in a warm blanket and still wearing a crown of flowers. And she stares into the fire and says, "Well, I'm here to learn how to run a company and eventually earn enough money to start my own organization. Um, a new order of the Wandering Weaver Knights. I've heard that the members of the old order were executed centuries ago for being heretics, only because they worshipped our eight-legged lady." And then she looks at you guys. "She's real, you know. The goddess saved me. My former crew left me on an inhospitable island with no food or water, so I would starve. They said, 'You poisoned your crew mates with your apples.' And I said, 'Well, that was not intentional, so don't blame me.'" Um, if someone wants to describe their reaction, feel free to, because I think the camera lingers on some of your faces. Maybe someone spits out some of the cider, someone passes it along.
I think Obeha is watching you very, very carefully, just as though the apples themselves, they cannot be discerned what is poisonous, but rather trying to discern whether or not your words are poisonous, whether or not you continue to lie. Or is it the truth that it really wasn't poison, it wasn't your intentions? I think it's a little bit unnerving, Vendra, because you realize that their eyes, they are very clearly not human eyes, but the eyes of a frog watching, trying to discern you. Maybe their story about the human becoming Fae. Maybe they wanted something in reverse instead.
So, thanks. I think I'll continue. And, anyways, our eight-legged lady provided me with food and water. You see, I was too weak to hunt or gather anything. I was lying in a cave, thinking I would die soon. And then I noticed a distressed little bird caught in a spider web, and several flies and other vermin. The spiders caught something every day and shared it with me. And in the morning there was dew in the webs for me to drink. And so, well, I think you can get what happened. So, you see, the Weaver Knights will weave an enormous web that will catch all our enemies, and I will have my sweet revenge. When the time comes, you will get the choice to join us, of course. And then she shrugs. Or you could just be flies caught up in that web.
Seated close to the fire, all huddled up in a coarse woolen cloak, is one of the younger members of your company, maybe the youngest. He's a scrawny, malnourished teenager, probably 15 or 16, but looks to be 12 or 13. Listening to Vendra's story, he starts laughing strangely. I know better than to believe all these stories. I know how campfires work. I know we're just telling telling tales to make each other laugh or be scared of what's around us. But I'll tell you, I can tell you a story that's true, and I know it's true because I heard it from a scullery maid who heard it from an older squire who heard it from a knight, and knights aren't allowed to lie. So you know it's true. As he's talking, he's absentmindedly picking at a hunk of bread, pulling off little pieces and slipping them inside his cloak and pulling his hand back out empty. The the knight who told the squire who told the maid who told me this story, he served on campaign with the king. This was back when the king went on campaign against Nagane before the last outbreak of peace. This was not too long ago, but he said the king's army was losing badly. This was they were cut off from their retreat lines. They had pushed too far out into the side of Nagane and were pushed back into the Sea of Bone itself. I don't know if anyone could survive it, but they said it was certain death and everything seemed lost. But they thought they were going to die of thirst or something worse. And the knight said that the king, no one saw him leave. No one saw him leave the camp, and no one saw where he went. They only saw him coming back into the camp with a funny gleam in his eyes. And this knight said that he had found something. King had found something out in the desert, a weapon maybe, or a saint's tomb. The knight didn't know. Nobody knew. But whatever he brought back, well, it changed everything. The army escaped the Naganese. They pushed back through and returned home. And they say the king was different after that. He lost his interest in waging war and didn't bother with Nagane anymore. You see Pharaoh's eyes dart over to Rias, gauging his reaction.
Rias is listening intently. Also, there might be a gleam in his own eye.
Well, anyway, this was about when the king, uh, decommissioned the army, the standing army, and disbanded it. He recommissioned his knights as king's guard, doubling the number of guards and sending them into the cities to clean up the streets and clear out the vermin. Well, you know the rest. You know what happened then. The urchins and prostitutes started turning up with those spirals carved into their chests, and well, with no more knights, there was no more need for squires, so we started disappearing also. Where to, I have no idea, and I ran before I could end up like the others. I wasn't the only one. Whoever was able to find their way out got out, but we couldn't trust the guards. We couldn't trust the city folk. We saw those spirals everywhere, painted on doors and barrels. I just followed the music until I found you all. But I just figure if I can learn what it was that the king found in that desert, he glances back at Rias. Well, maybe I could figure out why everything changed and what happened to my friends and how we're going to make him pay. Vero sits back a little nervous, wondering if maybe he said too much. Goes back to nibbling a bite of his bread, pulls off a hunk, slips it into his cloak. Anyway, you probably don't believe that anyway.
I think we sit for a long time and we see Hughes sort of staring into the fire that's burned down now so that it has become coals. And I think this puts him in a meditative state. And he points at the remainder of the fire and he says, "My beloved was a seamstress's daughter. Red hair like fire coals, and a smile I would move the world for. She loved stories of princesses. She loved that a princess might speak to animals or feel a solitary pee through many mattresses. She often spoke of how you might just find you were a princess if you could hear animals speak, or you found that you were especially sensitive. We spoke quietly to each other on an empty hill, and swore love always that we would be each other's prince and princess. I had gone away to seek my fortune, but word came to me that my beloved had been taken by the witch of the keep. The rumors of the witch were terrible. She stayed in her keep awaiting her dark servants to empty entire villages, to be brought to her great feasting hall, where she would devour 7 great tables every night of whatever flesh could be provided. Cows, swine, babies, maidens. Now, this next part of the story is, I will admit, a little fantastic. I was told that my beloved had been taken by the witch of the keep, by a talking mouse named Filigree. I thought I had gone mad too when I first encountered it. But I thought that if everyone was secretly a princess, it would have been my beloved. The mouse disabused me of this notion, however, for you see, the witch believed that if she ever ate the flesh of a being that had never been consumed by a human stomach, that the ancient curse that she was under would be broken. The witch had consumed so many magical creatures that the powers of her keep began to warp even the keep's own vermin. The mouse Filigree had heard my beloved crying and had sought me out to rescue her. Fortunately for us, my beloved had been told that she would be eaten in 3 days, and with all speed we only arrived at the castle on the 3rd day. The mouse Filigree led me through passageways that would keep me away from the witch's dark servants until we reached the great feasting hall. Had I had my wits about me, I would have known that I had little chance of defeating such a mighty fiend. But love drove me. I burst into the room. I'll never forget the sight. To my right were 3 great tables, polished, as it were, with blood. Not one scrap of gore or bone, just the blood that had been pressed into the wood. I imagined from the witch's licking. At the center table, a long spear was driven into a woman's body. I shuddered as I approached, but it was not my beloved. It was a middle-aged woman, very beautiful in her own way, hair of raven. She seemed to smile peacefully. I turned to Filigree. He was gone. It was then that I heard it, a slurping, crunching sound. In the dark of the corner, I saw some form, matted hair and nails the length of my hand. It hunched over something. To my horror, my beloved emerged from the shadows, turned into some fiendish monstrosity. Yet, as I watched, her hair lost its tangle, her nails returned to their usual size, her spine returned to a normal shape. She told me that she had obtained a pair of scissors, that she had waited until she was brought by the guards to the table, that she had stabbed a guard and taken its spear. She had fought the witch, stabbing her into the table. Then she felt the terrible feeling of her own body assuming a horrible shape. She had taken on the witch of the keep's curse. But just in the nick of time, we had arrived, and she had managed in her monstrous form to grab Filigree, a magical mouse, surely flesh that had never been consumed by a human stomach. She had reached her arms out to me. Didn't I see? Tears were streaming down her face. Yes, her friend Filigree had given his life, but hadn't it worked? Had it not removed the curse that was before her? She reached her hands out to me, and I reached out for her, and we held each other for a moment, and then she hiccuped, and she pushed me away, and as I watched, she stumbled and fell to the ground, placed her hands on the ground, and began crying all the harder, muttering, "No, no, don't let me be a princess now. Don't let me be a princess now." And with that, she retched and she vomited up just the mere bones of the poor Filigree. And as the mouse began to come out of her mouth, she began to change herself again. And she said, "Run, my beloved!" And she threw herself at the remaining tables of food and began to gobble down everything that was in her path. And I ran from the keep. And so I am with this company because I am in search of a food that has never been eaten by a human stomach. I hope that I will be able to find that so that I may give my beloved that which she craves.
You said she transformed into a monster of some kind?
Yes.
Interesting.
Such tall and wild tales have been told around this fire. I'm afraid I will bore you with mine. The reason I company is that I simply wish to go home. But for my sins, I'm banished from that home, the city of Amberet. Font says with a look towards Yargash. I was once apprenticed to the great demon master Zephyri, who taught me how to bind and bargain with demons from below to do our bidding under contract. Until they had discharged their work. Zephyri was widely sought after in the city, in the charcoal district in particular, for no furnace burns brighter than one powered by a demon's fire, or among the people of the salt district, for no miner digs harder than one who is bound to his work and digs with a demonic power. But Zephyri kept his wealth to himself, and although I learned much, I felt I did not profit from it as I should, and so I began to make my own bargains. For there are other things that people of the city of Ambered desire. Vero was blushing to think of it, to speak of it earlier. But another capability that demons have is to take on forms, any form you could wish. A man, a woman, a thing. And those forms can be sold to the service of those with coin. And that was how I made my riches. But Zephyri, my master, when he found what I'd been doing, was enraged. But he soon found that I had altered his contract with his particular familiar. And here at this point, Vaunt looks toward the shadowy form that flits about him. This imp that protects me once protected my master, until I inserted a clause into its contract. And it is quite terrible to witness what a demon that has been bound for many years will do to the one who bound it. But Zevori had rich and powerful family and friends, and I had to flee, or I would have surely ended up in Barsoul prison. And so I give my services to this company, and one day I will earn enough gold that arms may be crossed such that my crimes are forgotten and I can return. As I say, a simple tale.
When Vaunt mentioned Barsoul prison, Yargash looks down into his cup with a distant stare.
Your tales are all well told, and shall put you in better stead with the remainder of the company, making it easier for you to achieve your goals. Everyone please add 1 gold to your hoard. But one tale was favorite, most loved among the tales, and we're going to vote for that now. Type in the name of the treasure hunter into the chat, whose story, not your own, whose story you liked best. Once you have the name typed in, put a thumbs up and we will vote at the same time. That is all thumbs up. Hit enter. 1, 2, 3 votes for Hughes. 1 for Rias. 4 votes for Hughes. 2 for Rias. 3 for Rias. Looks like Hughes just edged it. Is that the case? Let's go back in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Indeed it was. Congratulations, Hughes. You get to add 3 gold to your hoard additionally. Congratulations as well to Rias, though. Those were clearly the two the 2 favorite stories of the night.
Well, good. I'll keep siphoning everyone's cider.
Indeed. Before we go, just real quick, who among you was supposed to be on watch this whole time? Anyone want to fess up?
Would be fun if it was Vero.
Yeah, I think it was Vero the kid, and he just got gradually sucked in to the storytelling.
The cry goes up in camp. Grab your gear. You hear them pressing in from the tree line in their dozens. Moss-sick men and women pressing in. They are pressing in. There are dozens of them. They are in overwhelming numbers. Endurance 13. If you're in the combat, please say how you're exposed and roll your weak point.
I am lying drunk, passed out next to the fire.
Does that mean you are not in the combat?
I was about to say, maybe I'm rolling over.
I see
Someone's
it
gonna
coming.
kick you.
I think Yargash it rushes back to his tent to retrieve some supplies, but he does very much intend to help defend the camp. He is exposed to attack mostly because he's not a fighter. He has hands for surgery, but not for combat, and he likes to maintain distance.
What's your weak point?
5, motherfucker.
5. Not great.
I think Vaunce brings up he is a fighter, but being as he was the last to tell his story, he was still basking in the horrified glances of his companions around the fire. Too much to be as ready as he should have been. His weak point is 6.
We have a 5. We have a 6. Keep calling out your exposure.
I think Vero was prepared. I mean, being meant to be on watch, he had a blowgun sitting at the ready, sort of across his lap. So he's ready to go, and he realizes in this moment that he should have been ready to go a long time ago. I think his embarrassment is his weak point. He is eager to help others, but is just his confidence is crippled, and his weak point is 2.
Would it be fair to say that Rios's cider was a little poisoned?
For sure.
Because we don't know which ones are poisonous.
So the myth about the Naganese being able to transmute poison in their bodies is not real.
We're just not used to this one yet.
Which generation Naganese is he?
Yeah. Which cast are we talking about?
Which cast
here?
are we talking? What's your weak point?
It is 5.
5. All right, let's keep going. If you're in the fight, roll weak point. Tell me how you're exposed.
So many 5s. I think that Hughes hears the sounds that these creatures are making, and just having told the story of his beloved is reminded of similar sounds that she made, and it's sort of like he's in his head a little bit.
What's that number? 5. A lot of 5s. The 5 is not great.
Quick question: does being in the combat still allow to reduce the endurance? Because 13 is it's high, but on the other hand, we're a lot of people.
If you know the weak point of the creatures, that allows you to bump it down to 12.
Is this one of the situations where maybe we aim for the heads?
Yeah, we do. As the company, we do. Yeah.
I'd be yelling that out. Aim for the heads.
Aim for the heads.
All right. I think Vendra is a bit tipsy and clearly overconfident because she really wants to get her revenge, and that's, those are easy targets.
Mm-hmm. Is that everyone? Obeha, are you the last one?
I'm sort of staying out of combat because even in dealing with its weakness, it's still 12, so someone has to reduce its endurance even further. I think Obeha is casting sort of bolts of arcane energy to provide a little bit of cover for my compatriots, trying to get the creatures to be startled, to be blasted back, so that we can pick them off one by one.
In the interest of time, I'm going to just let you have that. We'll have one further reduction to 11, but you're out of the combat. You can't actually do the combat. Who else wants to?
I was going to send my bound imp in to fight, who is classed as one of my weapons. And
it's just your weapon at this point.
Yeah, but a ranged weapon. He can act at a distance.
If you want to hang back as well, you can. It's still going to be endurance 11.
I'm already moss infected, so yeah, let's maybe I've had enough of taking these things on at close range, and I'll let my demon do the work for me.
Indeed. We have
Do I need
got.
to make a risk roll for that, or is
Do
that
not. We'll see how the combat
Okay.
goes in your absence. So we have 6 people participating. Bertram, sounds like you got yourself together eventually. Combat 6. Hughes, you can do the honors since you were the winner of the tale telling. Roll a combat 6, please. We're looking for 11 total on the 2 highest dice.
So I put 6 into dark.
To combat. There's an actual roll that says combat.
Okay, but then it has a dark.
Yeah, yeah, 6. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
It's not enough.
It is not enough. It is 2 3s, a 4, a 1, a 2, and a 6. If your weak point was hit, describe
No
how you're
5s.
taking. Yeah, no 5s. Describe how you're taking the hit, and then, or if you're marking your armor, describe how your armor takes the hit. But everybody gets a chance to narrate. First of all, the cowards. Abeha, Vaunt, please describe your contributions to this.
Do I still need to? Oh, my weak point got hit. Do I still need to take them?
Oh, I didn't have you roll weak. I thought you were backing out.
Okay, yeah, I was. Yeah, so I was just doing the ranged. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like as everybody else is rushing forward to engage these people directly on I think Opeha takes out their staff, which was behind the log that they were sitting on, sort of plants it firmly into the ground, starts to wave their hands over it as there is like this little crystalline rock in it, and it starts to glow. And as Obeha is sort of looking through it, sort of pointing their finger, saying out the command words, little beams of motes of arcane energy crackle out of it, hitting the ground. Tufts of like dirt get blasted up, spraying these creatures. They don't seem to be quite as startled as they Obeha had hoped, but then started to blast them directly, sort of like hitting off like some of the moss, so that goes sprawling off, but they still come.
Vaunt, give us some. What's your demon doing?
Yeah, it's at a muttered word from Vaughn, the shadowy shape of the imp just soars across the camp and is briefly visible, kind of swirling around these shambling creatures and gleefully ripping pieces of them off.
Fantastic. Rias, give us the first part of the combat.
I think Rias is actually doing a little bit of coordinating. Gets up on top of a log, or the seat of honor of wherever the storytellers were, and has this Naganese royal spear by which he's using to sort of like extend as a pointer finger, being like Vero Vendra over here, Yargash, Hughes around the right, and is sort of directing in that way.
Yargash, this is not your job in camp. What are you doing?
It's absolutely not. Yargash is rushing into his into the surgery tent. Past probably a cot or two of wounded people that are recovering, groaning in pain. He passes by Lucky on the stool and goes to a trunk of belongings and like throws it open and begins to like throw out pads of like gauze and like blankets, and reaches down to this hefty, old, battered, heavy crossbow, where he begins to like fumble with it, cursing under his breath at his damnable father for investing in this infernal contraption, and like is getting it locked and loaded into place, rushing out to camp, yelling out as well that it's like the heads, you fools, aim for the fucking heads, and is positioning himself, trying, and he just aims for quite a while, but he shifts the button of stock against his shoulder and occasionally like he does have a surgeon's precision, and it does impact one of the members of the horde just right through the eye socket, crunching through the weakened exterior. And he just grimly nods and has to brace himself on the ground again to begin loading another bolt.
Vendra, how would the Weaver Knights avail themselves in this situation?
Uh, she's got a weighted net, so that's the closest she gets to spelling a web and catching them. And there are several of the infected, of the moss sick, under inside the net, and she gets closer, and she delights in stabbing the heads, popping the heads, but takes a hit when one of them bites her arm.
I can say my Vero's weak point was hit. I think in the initial entry of the moss sick into the space, he steps back in anxiety and steps sort of too close to the fire, and his woolen cloak ignites. So he tears it off and stamps it out, removing the cloak. So he's marking that armor. But the rest of you would see at this point that underneath the cloak he had been wearing on a chain, he's got a cage full of rats that is now sort of clattering and bumping around as he's backing away from the fire. But he would eventually recompose himself and bring up his blowpipe and try to fire a dart right through the head of the nearest of them, keeping his distance.
Hughes has a hunting spear, and I think this is a boar spear. He's hunted all sorts of things because he wants to get strange meat for the stomach of his beloved. And so he's fortunately, this boar spear allows him to stay at some distance, and the crossbeam is sort of like keeping them back as he sort of shuffles backwards with the front of this line, occasionally throwing one of his hatchets into the oncoming hordes to try to keep everything, and is managing to keep his distance for now.
Bertram, when the call comes out of the attack, it's kind of trampled over a little bit in the chaos. And as he gets up, he ends up walking through part of the fire and probably knocking a few people over. And he heads off headstrong out into the forest to start fighting head on. Possibly not the best move, but we're gonna hit that ruin and leave my armor for later.
The second round, Vaunt, Obeha, if you want to join the fray, you certainly can by rolling weak point. If not, Rias, you're going to roll a combat 7.
Are Obeha and Vaunt joining?
I think I'm
join.
good here.
I'll join. Make it a combat 8.
Combat
And
8.
I will. I rolled my weak point earlier. It's 6.
Boxcars. 1, 2, 3, 2, 5, 6, 6, 4.
Some hits in there, but again, we'll take it away. This time, narrate how you are helping turn the tide. Start with Rias.
Quick check. Can we use rituals narratively, not to reduce?
Of course.
Yeah. Then I think what we see is we actually see Rias. His upper shirt comes off, and we see that his skin has tiger stripes across it. Also, a bunch of carved, just what looks like somebody doing sort of like similar vein to like the idea of like cutting up a boar. Like somebody has clearly designed it that there are like lines running up, like chi lines running up his body, but he grows a full like 7 to 8 inches. His maw becomes cleft. He gains these like long saber-toothed fangs, and like his whole upper body just kind of like increases severely in size as this white weir tiger steps forward through the campfire and just starts going John Rambo on a bunch of these moss sick. In the process, I do take a hit. I will mark armor for it. Actually, yeah, I'll mark armor for it. And so I think what we see is like at one point he like charges fully into a group of the Mosaic and just is buried underneath them and smacks like a wave of them aside, and we just see 3 4 Mosaic bodies go flying, but his shield has been dented in that process.
Whoever wants to keep going, please do.
Yeah, I think,
I think
Vaunt draws his sword and steps forward, but the tide of these creatures is starting to come toward him, and we see the amulet that he wears around his neck flare, and as it does, Togmala, his imp, comes racing back, like flying at impossible speed to uh, strike the creature that's threatening him, and he's able to run another one through the skull.
so. I take a hit, but I mark armor, and basically it looks like um, Vendra recently lost her shield, got a new one, and now this one will be gone in a second because she uses it to smash in some heads and it gets completely destroyed. And then she finds herself surrounded by half a dozen of those creatures all coming closer. And since we're allowed to use the rituals for um, narrative purpose, I think they suddenly get slower, and she mutters some words and conjures some apples um, inside their heads. So those pop, and they all drop to the floor simultaneously.
Um, Yargash is not exactly the most capable with his crossbow. He's getting a few good hits in, but eventually it becomes too slow and cumbersome. He took a hit, but I will also be marking armor. And as the horde is like bearing down on the camp, he's reloading and just sweating profusely. But the tide is just pushing closer and closer and closer until eventually it's past the threshold of him being able to manage it at range. And his hand like slips from the exertion on trying to like get the bolt reloaded. And while he's trying to correct that again and shift his position, he's actually tackled by one of these moss infected, and its gnashing teeth are just like trying to find purchase around his clavicle, the meat of his shoulder, and his upper arms. But the very like tough like surgeon's leather tunic he wears is designed to repel even the sharpest blades that could, slice a man's flesh open to ribbons. And it really just begins to protect him at that time. But his crossbow knocked out of his hands. As he's scrabbling on the ground, he reaches for his hip sheath and pulls off a very sharpened skinning knife, where he begins to like stab it and plunge it into the neck of this thing. He actually manages to roll over on top of it, like using one like knee to like pin it into the earth, the other hand to hold it by the head, as he begins to just cut with furious but surgical precision to begin sawing the neck off until he finds the bone, and then just like twist and crunch it down into the earth a little bit, panting heavily, wipes the sweat from his brow, and makes the very smart choice to retreat back a little bit more to let the more capable people handle this immediate but thinning front line.
I, being said more capable person at this moment, come running in as Yargash is being wrestling with this Mossick, and I take a moment to defend him from oncoming beast, and I basically am able to knock one of them away from him and gash its throat out over off to the side. And I look up right as he is getting off of his and retreating back, and I fall back with him.
Vero is backed up against the fire. The moss sick are closing in on him, and he doesn't want to do it, but it's his only option. He reaches down into the fire and pulls out several of the sticks, several of the pieces of burning and collapsing wood, and he pulls them out with his bare hands, lays them out on the ground in front of him, gets down and begins to whisper to them in a language or voice that doesn't form words, but the fiery sticks begin to shake and quiver and elongate into snakes that are wreathed in flame. And I send them forward where they go slithering up to the mosslick that are approaching, binding to their legs, crawling up their legs, and lighting them up just as torches, where they collapse in front of me. Both of Pharaoh's hands are badly burned, but he pulls out from under his shirt a blue amulet, which pulses with blue light, and then the light is gone, but his hands are no longer burned.
I think as Hughes has handled this spear, he's tried to sort of curve himself along sort of the border of the camp to try to lead sort of things away from the center. And as he's doing this, he's overwhelmed. One of the moss infected tackles him, and he sort of lets go of his spear and rolls off, rolling his stiff wool cloak off with this hit. And he pulls out his throwing hatchets and just starts smashing these things in their faces, like his beloved at the tables, as she was just going and going. And I think the particularly aggressive one that knocked him off, after taking out several, he sees it starting to charge him, and he fumbles over on the ground and grabs his spear and sort of lays back and holds it as it sort of like comes down, and just has to hold it for a long while it slathers in its face until it stops moving. And then he heaves it off, and by the time he stands up, it seems that most of the other action in the camp has died down as well.
Indeed. The battle was raging all over the camp. The company managed to fend off the creatures. There is carnage, smashed, pulped skulls all over the place. Quite a few company members also lost their lives, sadly, but that just means bigger shares for you, right? And that concludes our time. Yargosh, please roll 11 gold, or gold 11.
Why, I'd be happy to. Gold 11. All right, watch this. 1.
Oh, trophy die roller.
That's trophy, baby.
Well, you all can decide on Discord who's getting the little bit of treasure that was found among the dead moss sick. And thank you all for this wonderful time. Goodbye.